This is the second video about the Democratic Republic of the Congo and discussing the Congo peoples. So as mentioned in the previous video, the Democratic Republic of the Congo River are spelled with a C. The Congo peoples and their language and their kingdom, the language is the Congo language, are with a K. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. So I provided a little bit of background on the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the political situation through roughly today. So as I mentioned, in the first century, there were migrations from Nigeria here to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So south and a bit east. And so these migrations led to agricultural societies that engaged in ironworking and beadworking, as well as long distance trade. And by roughly 1400, they gave way to the Congo Kingdom. And this kingdom is founded by Mimi Alukini. And he's a hunter and a blacksmith and introduces blacksmithing to the community. And in 1483, the Portuguese traders and explorers made contact with the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and this significantly affects art and religion. This is the start of the transatlantic slave trade, as well as trading for objects like rubber, ivory, brass, European cloth, metals, etc. But although this is the start of the transatlantic slave trade, this is not an example of instant subjugation of the Congo people, right? So through the 16th and 17th century, the Congo Kingdom is actually quite powerful throughout the world, and they send diplomats to Europe. And the king rules the nation as the earthly representation of the sky god and supreme judge. And so the king is powerful in the political, economic, judicial, and religious realms. Under the king, you have chiefs who rule at a regional level, and then they become chief through lineage and associations. And within the society, you have initiation associations, like we've talked about before, but these don't have to do with power within society, but are rather educational. So as mentioned before, you have similarities of belief between Nigeria with the Yoruba people and the Edo people and the Congo people. So here, you can see depictions of the 4 moments of the sun. So again, cyclical, the cardinal directions. You have sunrise, birth. In the east, you have the prime of life, midday in the north. The setting sun represents the older person in the west, and then death is night in the south. So as we saw in the previous lecture, one arm up, one arm down is the gesture indicating the 4 moments of the sun. So this lecture is primarily going to focus on power objects, as well as the syncretism of the Congo religion and Christianity. So these objects are called power objects. They were called fetish objects by missionaries, which is a very problematic term, but you do occasionally see them called that. And these are called nkisi, singular, and minkisi, which is the plural. So nkisi is with an N, as you can see here. And these are made to fix problems as well as protect communities from harm. And these are things that do things. So basically, these are containers of spiritually charged materials, so bolongo. And bolongo is herbal medicines and power-laden substances. So again, right, it's similar to the idea of niyama, not to simplify everything down too far, but just to point out to you that there is, once again, this idea of energy within all things, this power within it, and this idea that there are certain people who are able to manipulate the power within these objects. And so these power-laden substances, this bolongo, is used to activate the powers of the dead. And so these objects, these nkisi, are not herbally powered. So they're not powered by the energy that is within these objects, but rather they're powered by the ancestors. And so these objects capture the soul or the spirit of the ancestor. So Bolongo, these are activating substances. So they are powerful and they get the attention of the ancestors, but it is the ancestors who truly have the power and create actions and enforce behavior. So these substances, Bolongo, are mixed with resin and coated on the figure. It can include things like earth from the land of the dead, so earth from a graveyard, river clay, because the dead live in ancestral waters. They can be punning on names for items, and usually the Bolongo is placed in the stomach, although there are sometimes cavities within the head as well as the feet. And what you see here is this extension of the Bolongo. These objects are usually carved from one piece of wood, and they involve some amount of kaolin, which again, white is the color of the dead, as well as red ochre, leaves, seeds, snakes, birds of prey, all of these things. And you'll often see a mirror over the stomach, which refers to water, because water is the middle realm, but also its reflective properties allow it to deflect malevolent energy. So a sculptor collaborates with an nganga, and the nganga is the priest who is able to manipulate the power and to summon the ancestors. The size of the nkisi indicates the usage. If it is quite large, it's likely the property of a chief or king to deal with the community's problems. Smaller objects are likely for private family issues. It's very dangerous to make these. So again, right, think about the Bamana people, how it is dangerous to make these. Only certain people are able to control the power within these objects. And so you need a specialist to be able to handle and manipulate the power of these objects. And these objects themselves harness the power of the Bakisi, or the spirits. And this is not just ancestral spirits, but collectively. And so the objects that you see driven into the Nkisi here are used to awaken the spirits and send the energy of the Bolongo to them. So what you see are things like nails and blades and razors, etc. And these are driven into the figure, and this sends energy to the spirits. And this allows people to do things like solidify agreements, etc. As mentioned before, the stomach is the seat of the soul, followed by the head. And these figures are all seeing. They can see when witches approach. These would be used by the people who own them, or you could pay for the privilege of using someone else's in order to harness the power of the ancestors and other spirits. So these objects would be used in divination, right? So seeing the future, healing, fertility, success in things like trading and hunting, etc., as well as something like sealing a pact. So if you see an object in an nkisi with many nails and blades driven into it, this means that it is a successful and powerful object. If it has only a few, that means that it didn't work. And these figures are used to find out and correct all kinds of misfortune. They can be used to alleviate suffering or to inflict harm. But this is not harming a specific individual. This is specifically harming witchcraft and fighting it. And so these can be used for specific purposes. But essentially, oftentimes these are used for making oaths or for making wishes known. And basically what happens is that you would have two people who come before this and the person who is able to manipulate it in order to make an oath. And they would both spit or lick the nail or the blade, and then it would be driven into the figure with a hammer. And this is a way of kind of jolting the spirits awake and sending them the energy of the Belongo, and in this way summoning the spirits to come and witness this oath. So one thing that is very noteworthy is that you might be familiar with this, you probably are familiar with the concept of having a humanoid figure that you then drive pins or stakes into in order to inflict harm. So that is something that's very common in how the West perceives voodoo. And how voodoo has evolved in some places. But you can see that it's very different from this. So driving a nail into one of these figures is perhaps to fight witchcraft, but it's not to inflict harm on a specific individual. So driving something into the elbow of one of these figures is not like the conception of where you have a voodoo doll and you stick a pin in the elbow and they get a pain in their elbow. That's not at all what we're seeing, but you can see that there are a lot of similarities, and this is where the idea of the voodoo doll comes from. So a little bit more about these objects. They typically have clothing or a loincloth, but you don't always see that on these objects because museum curators would remove these. They felt that it obscured the formal aesthetic properties of these objects. And so you have these Nkisi, but you also have Nkisi Nkondi. So before I get to those, and this is an Nkisi Nkondi, I should clarify that, just a couple of contextualizing images. This was taken before 1912, and here you can see a family posing with their power figure. They're Nkisi Nkondi, and you can see that it is almost life-size. It's the size of their children. And this is an X-ray, and you can see that there are objects behind the eyes as well as objects within the beard. So this idea of including objects with power, embedding them within this figure. Okay, so this is an Nkisi. This would be for personal use. It is small and it's not aggressive. Here we see another Nkisi. This one's probably Nkisi Nkondi, and it looks like it is in fact quite a successful Nkisi Nkondi. Let's see, I wanted to get to the DIA object. So this is at the DIA. If you go into the, I believe it's maybe the ancestors room, it's the main object in the center of the room there. This is an example of an Nkisi Nkondi. So Nkisi stands for medicine and Nkondi stands for hunter or hunting. And these are made specifically to fight malevolence. So these are not just to witness oaths and follow through on agreements, right? These are aggressive. Their mouth is open. They often have a somewhat threatening gesture, but that's not always necessary. And these are warriors, and they communicate with the dead. Again, you have this emphasis on the stomach, semi-naturalistic yet abstracted. And one thing that I didn't mention before, apologies, when these nails or blades are driven into the object, it serves as a way of both parties affirming that they will follow through on whatever it is that they promised. By being there, by promising to do something, and by including their saliva on these objects, they're letting the ancestors know that they are swearing to do X. And if they don't do X, the ancestors might hold them accountable. So this is a very effective way of ensuring that people follow through on what they say they will do. So in the 1800s, these were outlawed by the colonizers, and many of these were burned or destroyed or confiscated, although some were brought to the West as an example of a curiosity, some amount of studying of the Congo culture, as well as this is the sort of object, the fetish that might be brought by a missionary back to the West to demonstrate how successful their religious activities are. So a few more Nkisi and Kondi. This one is an Nkisi. Okay, so again, this aggressive stance, right? And this is a kozo. So this is a two-headed dog that is explicitly designed to fight witchcraft. And it sees into both worlds at once. It's Janus-faced, or has two faces. Okay, so a couple of other power objects. So I wanted to conclude this lecture by talking about Christianity in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So when the Portuguese made contact with the Congo in 1483, they introduced Christianity. And by 1491, the king converts and is baptized, and it becomes a diplomatic move to convert to Christianity. It serves a political and spiritual purpose, and it enables friendly relations with many European countries, governments. It really is very beneficial for the Congo people. And this is not perhaps as foreign a concept. This religion is not as foreign as it might seem. So this is an example of syncretism. So the combination of two things into one new thing. So Christianity in the Congo is not Christianity like we have here in the West. It's an incorporation of their traditional animistic beliefs combined with Christianity. And so what you see here is a crucifix with a depiction of Jesus Christ crucified on the cross, surrounded by, I believe, let's see here, the Virgin Mary. I believe it's also probably St. John the Evangelist, etc. And so it combines very well with the Congo beliefs. So Christian arts are used as yet another way to contact the gods and the ancestors. And even the form of the cross, although these are Western proportions and is very similar to Western iconography, it represents the crossroads, right? So you can see how that ties in very well with the traditional belief system. And you have these other figures. So Gabriel, Michael, the Virgin Mary, right? John the Evangelist. And these are seen as revered ancestors, right? So they tie in very well with the ancestral spirits. Even Jesus can be seen as a revered ancestor. And one thing that you'll notice is, again, there's this emphasis on the belly button. So again, pointing back to the ancestors. The spiritual realm is ambiguous because the faces are abstracted. And through the 18th century, we have a lot of conversions because the 18th century is when colonization begins. So this is 16th to 17th century, and these crosses, these crucifixes, are based on Portuguese models. This is mostly lost wax casting. So we saw lost wax casting before with the Kingdom of Benin. So again, it's this idea that, you know, say I wanted to make a cast of my fist, I would make it in out of clay, right? Maybe a little bit smaller. And then I would coat it in wax and then cover it with another layer of clay. So you have a hard clay center and then a layer of wax, and then a clay outer. Then you would leave some holes in there. You would heat it so that the wax melts and runs out. And so you're left with this gap between the inner clay and the outer clay, right? So it's kind of like this. And then you would pour metal inside that gap so that the metal would then adapt to the form of the hand. And then once the metal is hardened, you would crack the clay on the outside, and you could also crack the clay inside of the metal, and that would give you a thin, hollow shape of the fist in this instance. And that's lost wax casting. So because the wax is lost, hence lost wax. Okay, so that's how these objects would be made, and they would be used as amulets in ancestral ceremonies. Again, right, you have these ancestor figures, you have the sign of the crossroads, etc. It's even possible that balongo, or these medicinal herbs, etc., would be attached. And these would be used in healing rites, as well as hunting amulets, part of the leader's regalia, and passed down through generations. Okay, another example of this syncretism of Christianity from the West and the traditional Kongo beliefs is this figure of Tony Malau, or Saint Anthony. And so he's seen as a symbol of good fortune. Saint Anthony of Padua is a 13th century Portuguese saint associated with women and children, and is the traditional protector of children and women. And it becomes this religious and political movement that protects children, fights against infant mortality, helps with fertility and childbirth, etc. And so these become very popular with the Kongo peoples. And they are used for healing. They're used as personal guardians, protections from illness. They can be made from prestige materials like ivory or brass, or wood, although not many wooden ones still exist. And we have this focus on a Western style, right? So Western proportions, facial details, robes, hairstyle, etc. But he is depicted as holding Jesus, shown as a Kongo king. So although the readings really emphasized the role of Christianity in the Kongo, it's important to note that it was adopted by people who adapted it into their existing belief system. Okay, that's it.